Winter gripped the Mesopotamian plain like a vice in the year 341 of the Common Era, the air thick with the bite of frost that seeped through mud brick walls and settled in your bones. You are Abdus a deacon in the shadow of Seleucia. Ctesiphon's spires, the empire's beating heart, where the Tigris whispered secrets to the reeds. The smell hits first acrid smoke from Zoroastrian fires kindled against the cold, mingling with the faint metallic tang of fear sweat from huddled neighbors. Your hands calloused from copying scriptures by lamplight clutch a worn codex as footsteps crunch outside your door, heavy boots on frozen earth. The knock isn't a knock, it's a battering ram's echo wood, splintering under the mob's urgency. Shouts rise next guttural Persian, laced with Aramaic curses, demanding entry in the name of the King of Kings. You bar the door, but it gives way, and torchlight floods the room, casting long shadows that dance like demons across your wife's loom, and the small altar where incense still curls from evening prayers. She stands beside you, her veil slipping eyes wide, but unyielding, while your brother-in-law grips a staff, his breath ragged. The soldiers pour in their armor, clinking like chains, faces masked in leather and contempt. They drag you all into the street, where the wind howls through date palms, stripped bare, carrying distant cries from other homes, mothers calling names that will never answer again. One guard, his breath fogging, in the chill levels, a spear at your chest. Worship the sun-dog of Rome, or your blood will paint this snow. You refuse, and the first blow lands a club, cracking against ribs that were whole moments ago. The pain blooms hot, but it's the sight that unravels you. Your wife's face pale as the moon mouthing a silent Kyrie eleison as they bind her wrists. The mob swells, neighbors turned informants, their whispers turning to jeers. In the torch glow, you see the king's edict unrolled, a parchment stained with the ink of betrayal, taxing your faith, double to fund wars against the empire that claims your Christ. But refusal means more than coin. It means the saws, the stakes, the rivers swollen with the drowned. By dawn, as the first light bleeds red across the Euphrates, the guards march your family to the execution ground outside the city walls, where pyres smolder from last night's dead. Rome's envoys, those silk-robed spies in the bazaar, will hear of this soon enough, whispers reaching Antioch, where Constantius paces his halls. But what words will they find for the silence that follows when even the crows fall quiet? What kind of empire forges loyalty from severed limbs and shattered altars? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic torture and executions, the deliberate machinery of an empire turning against its own people in ways that echo through centuries. These details are drawn from the Syriac acts of the Persian Martyrs, corroborated by Roman historians like Sozomen and Theodore, and even glimpsed in the dry prose of Ammianus, Marcellinus' primary voices from the 4th century, sifted through modern lenses like those in Richard Payne's 2021 reassessment in Studies in Late Antiquity. But they are deeply disturbing, evoking a grief that lingers. If this pulls too close to your own shadows, step away without a second thought. There's no shame in guarding your heart. History's weight is not meant to crush. For those still here, I commit to carrying this with care. We'll trace not just the blade's arc, but the bureaucracy that sharpened it, the edicts, the taxes, the informants who made faith a currency of war. These aren't tales to thrill. They're blueprints of erasure warnings etched in bone and ink. They remind us that power, when wedded to suspicion, devours the very families it claims to protect. And in remembering, we deny the silence its victory. This wasn't mere zealotry, a king's fleeting wrath against a rival god. This was a machine oiled by empire and geared for annihilation. Shapur II's Sassanid realm, stretching from the Indus to the Euphrates, recasting its Christian subjects, not as citizens, but as assets to be liquidated in the shadow of Roman borders. In the winter of 340, when snow dusted the ziggurats of Ctesiphon and the Tigris froze at its edges, an edict rippled out from the royal court. Christians, those whispers of the West, would pay double taxes to fund the endless wars against Constantius. Refusal, not fines but flesh ears, severed thumbs, crushed bodies sawn asunder to mock the cross they revered. What began as fiscal pressure metastasized into the Great Persecution, a 40-year grind that claimed thousands, perhaps 16,000, by the hagiographer's count. though Payne's recent scholarship tempers that to targeted strikes against the perceived disloyal, not a blanket genocide. The question isn't whether you can stomach the ledgers of the lost. It's whether you're willing to remember them to see in these ancient families the threads of today's exiles, the minorities branded as fifth columns in proxy wars. Shapur, that crowned infant who grew into a colossus of conquest, didn't just hunt heretics. He weaponized faith itself, turning Zoroastrian purity into a protocol for erasure. Roman scribes, those guardians of Christian narrative, recoiled in their villas, Sozomen calling it a sea of blood, Ammianus noting the barbarous cruelty that even pagan senators decried in dispatches to the emperor. Yet Rome, ever the mirror, had its own pyres. This was no exceptional horror, but a symptom of empires devouring their margins to feed the core. To grasp the stakes, consider the board: Sassanid Persia, heir to Achaemenid glory, locked in a death grip with Rome since the 3rd century borders, bleeding along the Armenian highlands and Syrian deserts. Christians numbering perhaps a tenth of the realm's 20 million souls by 300 AD weren't interlopers. They were woven in merchants and Arbella vintners, in Nisibis physicians to the court. But Constantine's conversion in 312, his letters to Shapur, pleading for his co-religionists, flipped the script. Faith became treason, a network of Roman spies embedded in the bazaars. The persecution wasn't theological pique. It was psychological warfare, a calculated vivisection of communities to cow the rest into apostasy or silence. If you believe these voices scratched in Syriac, on crumbling folios echoed in the ruins of Seleucia, deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view unearths another fragment from forgotten archives, ensuring the machine's blueprints don't gather dust unseen. For in their defiance, these families didn't just endure. They indicted the throne, proving that even in sawdust and stakes, the spirit forges its own unyielding alloy. This machine hummed on act by act, but its gears ground against something sharper than bone, the quiet resolve of those who chose memory over mercy. To understand what the Sassanids unleashed upon Christian families in that frozen spring of 341, you must first dismantle the forge that shaped Shapur II, not a monster born in thunder, but manufactured in the quiet cruelties of a court, where thrones were won with daggers and lost to whispers. The Sassanid Empire, that phoenix rising from Parthian ashes in 224 AD under Ardashir, sprawled like a lion across 3 million square kilometers, irrigated heartlands of Mesopotamia, yielding barley and dates under Quainats, snaking from the Zagros Mountains frontier, fortresses in Khuzestan, warding off Arab raiders and vassal satrapies in Armenia, where Mithra's fires flickered against encroaching crosses. By Shapur's birth in 309, the realm pulsed with Zoroastrian orthodoxy, its Mobids priests clad in white robes, their mouths veiled against ritual impurity, enforcing the Avesta's dualism, Ahura Mazda's light against Ahriman's chaos, order against the foreign taint of Greek philosophers or Nestorian hymns. Politically, it was a tinderbox. Rome under Diocletian and then Constantine had clawed back Mesopotamia in the crisis of the 3rd century, sacking Ctesiphon in 243 and leaving Sassanid coffers bled dry. Economic strains bit deep, the Silk Roads choked by Hunnic tolls, silver mines and media exhausted, forcing debasement of the drachm that sparked riots in the bazaars of Ecbatana. Socially hierarchies, ossified noble Wazurgan families like the Surens monopolizing cavalry commands, while Zoroastrian endogamy shunned converts branding Christians as MLKA outsiders, their churches taxed as illicit clubs. Military pressures mounted Shapur's father, Hormizd II, squandered legions on fruitless Syrian forays, his paranoia birthing purges that left the Sabba'e army masters riddled with intrigue. According to the Shahname's later echoes, though rooted in Sassanian oral lore, Hormizd's courtiers poisoned him in 309, fearing his reforms would upend their estates. The regent Shapur's uncles seized the reins, but the infant heir crowned in his mother's womb with a diadem of gold filigree loomed as a symbol of continuity. These events are attested in the Karnamag I Ardashiran, a Middle Persian epic from the 9th century. Drawing on lost Sassanian annals, corroborated by Armenian chronicler Agathangelos, who notes the fraternal feuds that scarred the royal bloodline. archaeological digs at Shapur, and rock reliefs carved into limestone cliffs depicting Roman captives in chains underscore the dynasty's martial ethos victory, not just in battle, but in the eternal sculpting of submission. By 325, when Shapur turned 16 and executed his regents in a midnight purge, their heads impaled on the palace gates, as Roman envoy Afrahat later reported in dispatches to Constantinople, the boy king had internalized the lesson. Power wasn't inherited. It was excavated from the graves of kin. He wasn't born to this shadow. Shapur entered the world amid the equinoctial winds of June 309 in the ochre palaces of Istakhar Persepolis's Sassanid rebirth, where cuneiform echoes mingled with Pahlavi scrolls. His mother, Hormizd, a noblewoman of the Karen family, whose estate spanned the Caspian slopes, cradled him in silks dyed with cochineal from Armenian trade routes. Family portraits idealized in Sassanian silver bowls unearthed at the Oxus site in 1970s. Soviet excavations depict a household of quiet opulence, Hormizd II's broad-shouldered with a torque of lapis, presiding over feasts where ayran fermented in goatskin bags and lutes plucked melodies from the gathas. Shapur's siblings, three brothers Narseh, Shapurak, and Hormizd, shared nurseries floored with Persian rugs, knotted in fire motifs, tutors drilling them in Avestan chants under the tutelage of herbods who burned haoma in bronze censers. But the idol fractured early. Hormizd's death in 309, whispered as a Mob's intrigue over temple lands, left Hormizd widowed at 25, her dowry estates in Fars contested by uncles who viewed the unborn heir as a pawn. She fled to the fire temple of Anahita, its domes vaulted like cupped hands birthing Shapur, amid chants that warded infant cries from demons. The uncles Zarinamir Narseh and Bahram usurped the regency their council chambers in Ctesiphon, reeking of intrigue parchments sealed with carnelian rings, plotting alliances with Hephthalite nomads, while Zoroastrian purists decried Hormizd's rumored Christian sympathies, a stain from her mother's Roman captivity. By age 5, Shapur witnessed his first loss. Brother Shapurak, a toddler of 3, perished in a fever poison. The whispers claimed his tiny body consigned to a Dakma tower, where vultures stripped flesh under the indifferent stars. Hormizd wailed in her chambers, her veils torn, but the regents barred her grief, citing ritual pollution. At 7, the machine tightened. Narseh, the eldest brother at 9, was groomed as rival heir, his riding lessons on step ponies in media a veil for the uncle's favoritism. Shapur, slight and watchful, shadowed the stables, inhaling the musk of sweat-lathered hides and the sharp ozone of thunderheads rolling from the Elbers. One autumn eve in 316, as leaves turned crimson on the royal orchards, Narseh vanished, dragged to a border skirmish. The tale went, but Agathangelos, writing from Armenian exiles, records the boy's mutilated return, throat slit in a hunting accident body, displayed as a warning against divided loyalties. Hormizd confronted the uncles in the audience hall, her voice echoing off lapis-inlaid pillars, only to be confined to Istakhar's inner sanctum, her meals laced with herbs that sapped her vigor. She lingered 2 years, her death in 318, officially consumption, but Payne's analysis of Sasanian medical papyri suggests arsenic leaving Shapur, orphaned at 9, the last scion standing amid a family reduced from 5 to 1. From the cradle he learned that thrones are built on pyres. Theodore observes in his Ecclesiastical History, a 5th century Greek text drawing on Syriac refugees' oral testimonies. The psychological forge accelerated tutors. Now, Mihir Narseh's puppets instilled a paranoia laced with piety, nights spent reciting the Vendidad's curses on liars, days drilling with Aswaran cavalry in the dust-choked plains of Khuzestan. By 12, Shapur orchestrated his first purge, accusing a Mobd of embezzling temple tithes. The priest's execution flayed alive in the royal square, skin tanned into a saddle for the king's mount, drew cheers from the Wuzurgan. But, in private, the boy vomited his hands trembling as he etched the date into an ivory tablet. The transformation staged itself in layers adolescent rages, quelled by Zoroastrian ablutions, where he immersed in sacred springs until skin pruned white. Alliances forged with Suran generals, their feasts heavy with roast ibex, and debates on Roman decadence. and a burgeoning zeal ignited when a Christian tutor smuggled in by Hormizd's last loyalist was exposed, his tongue nailed to a post, as Shapur watched, eyes hardening like flint struck to spark. And then everything changed. In 325, as the vernal equinox painted the sky in saffron over Nakshi Rostam, those cliff-carved tombs of ancestors Shapur, now 16 summoned the court to the Apadana's vast hypostyle hall, columns like petrified forests upholding a roof of cedar beams. The uncles arrived in brocade caftans expecting obeisance. Instead, royal guards loyalists bought with promises of border fiefs barred the doors. Mir Narseh, the chief regent, a man whose beard streaked silver like Zagros, or stepped forward with a smile that curdled. "Nephew, the throne awaits your wisdom." Shapur perched on the golden peacock throne, his diadem catching torchlight unrolled. A scroll inventories of their treasons from Hormizd's poisoning to Shapurak's fevered end, corroborated by a turncoat, scribe's confession extracted under hot irons in the dungeons below. The hall fell silent, save for the drip of lamps and the uncle's labored breaths. Shapur rose, his voice steady as the Tigris in flood. "You manufactured my solitude, uncles. Now witness its blade." Bahram lunged, dagger flashing. A spear felled him, breath gurgling out in a spray that stained the marble. Zarina begged, invoking Anahida's mercy. Shapur turned away, signaling the guards. They dragged Maher Narseh, last his pleas dissolving into screams as the court mobs chanted the yasna over the fray. By dawn, heads rolled at the gates, a descending tally from 3 to 0, the family line pruned to its apex. Shapur, wiping blood from his sleeves, felt not triumph, but a hollow clarity. The machine's first true turn. From that hall, he marched to war, not against kin, but Rome, carrying the lesson inward. Trust no asset, spare no threat, for even blood curdles under suspicion. The boy who once traced stars on chamber ceilings now etched edicts in stone, his reign a forge where faith would be the next ore to melt. What I'm about to describe isn't random savagery, a despot's tantrum amid the equinox winds. It's a system, 5 deliberate acts unfolding from April's thaw to summer's blaze in 341. Each calibrated to excise a layer of the Christian soul, community first, then clergy, laity, women, and finally the defiant core. Designed not for quick kills, but slow unraveling taxes to isolate tortures, to extract recantations, executions to seed terror. The edict proclaimed from Ctesiphon's ivory throne framed it as loyalty worship, the son deny the Nazarene, or forfeit your place in the Forwardigan, the blessed dead. But beneath lay the calculus Christians, as Roman adjuncts their churches as signal fires for Constantius's legions. Roman envoys in Antioch, poring over smuggled Syriac dispatches, termed it unheard-of barbarity. Their senators, pagan holdouts, murmuring that even Valerian's flaying paled beside this methodical dismemberment. First came the unraveling of the hearth in the reed-thatched villages along the Diala's Bend, where the air hung heavy with the scent of baking flatbreads and the lowing of riverine cattle. It was the 17th of April, Good Friday, by the Christian reckoning, the sun, a mocking disk low on the horizon, casting long shadows over fields greened by spring rains. Shapur's couriers astride dust-caked horses with saddlebags bulging from royal scriptoria had ridden through the night, their horns blaring like Araman's trumpets. In Beth Lapat, a cluster of mud homes huddled against hyacinthine hills, families like yours, Abdas, the deacon, his wife Miriam, of 28 summers, her brother Elias, a potter of 30, gathered for vespers, oil lamps flickering on icons smuggled from Edessa. The political winds howled. Shapur's failed siege of Nisibis, the prior year, Roman catapults hurling Greek fire that singed his banners, had bred paranoia. Christians with their Aramaic liturgies echoing Roman hymns were now assets of the enemy. Per the edict's preamble, their double tax, a noose disguised as ledger entry. The soldiers arrived at dusk 30 strong, under a Marsbon named Ardavan, his cuirass etched with fire altars, boots crusted in alluvial mud. They wore the Sassanid panoply-quilted gambesons, dyed crimson scimitars curved like scythes, faces shadowed under Spangen helms, crested with heron plumes. Villagers spilled from doors. shawls clutched against the evening chill, the taste of lentil stew souring on tongues as the captain unrolled the parchment. By the King of Kings, Shapur, worshipper of Mithra, you will offer incense to the sun, or render double the crown's due. Miriam, her dark hair braided with amber beads from her dowry chest, stepped forward, her voice steady as the Diala's current. She was no stranger to lost widowed young in a border raid, remarried to Abdas after years tending her father's kilns, her hands scarred from clay, but gentle on the sick. Elias flanked her, his apron-dusted white eyes flicking to the children, playing in the dust, oblivious yet. Refusal rippled like a stone in still water. Abdas cited scripture, his codex raised like a shield. The mob accompanying the troops robed in camlet and reeking of sandalwood incense sneered, invoking the Vendidad's ban on foreign rights. Tension coiled. A youth hurled a clod, a spear thrust, replied grazing Elias's arm. By nightfall, the family was bound wrists raw against hemp ropes dragged to the village square, where a fire pit still warm from paschal lamb, now cradled iron spikes heated to glow. The lead-up stretched deliberate questions, barked in Pahlavi, translated haltingly offers of mercy if they'd trample the cross etched in the dirt. Miriam whispered Paternoster, fragments her breath fogging. Abdas prayed aloud, drawing glares. The implements emerged not hastily but inventoried, as if auditing souls' thumbscrews forged in royal smithies, lashes of braided leather tipped with bone. The act itself blurred into implication, the night swallowing specifics under stars that wheeled indifferently. They led Miriam aside first to the commander's tent, pitched amid the reeds, its flaps drawn against the wind's keen. The square fell silent, save for the pop of embers and distant jackal yips. Hours passed. When they returned her, she staggered supported by Elias, her gaze distant as the horizon whispering of visions unbroken. Abdas endured next, the screws tightening until confession hovered on cracked lips, but his refusal held a deacon's vow, firmer than sinew. Elias last bore the lashes his back, a map of welts that wept in the dawn light. No one broke, the mobbed noted it in wax tablets for the king's archives. Immediate aftermath, bodies slumped in the dust, villagers tending wounds with poultices of myrtle and honey. But the square bore scars, bloodied earth raked smooth by dawn patrols. 3 families that night, 20 souls, including elders and laborers, marked the edict's first tally. By week's end, the Diala ran redder than its silt. This wasn't about Abdas or Miriam. It was the system's opening gambit, a ledger balancing loyalty against lives. The double tax instituted months prior in 339 wasn't fiscal whim, it revealed power's architecture. Zoroastrian ram peace tax doubled for MLKA non-believers, funneled to spa legions drilling on the Roman marches. As Sozomen recounts in Book 2 of his Ecclesiastical History, penned circa 440 from refugee testimonies, this targeted the social fabric, isolating Christians in guilds and villages, turning neighbor against neighbor, via informant bounties, a drachm, per recantation, per Pahlavi fiscal rolls unearthed in 1920s Takai Bustan digs. Scholarly debate swirls here, Payne in his 2011 Monks in the Making of a Christian. Persia argues the violence was surgical, aimed at clergy proxies for Roman intrigue, not wholesale. Yet the acts of Simeon, a Syriac passio from the 390s, tallies hundreds in Bethlapot, alone corroborated by Armenian Buzandaran Patmut Iun, which notes Sassanid Marzbans incentivized with fiefs for quotas met. Broader patterns emerge. This act eroded the koinonia, the communal bonds of Christian agapai feasts, replacing them with apostasy's chill. Modern parallels sting, think Ottoman Dev Shurmi levies on Christian youths, or Soviet purges framing faith as espionage. Long-term, it scarred Mesopotamia's demography. Church synods in 410 at Seleucia limped with half their bishops per Catholicos Isaac's letters. They didn't seek martyrs. Martyrs multiply, as Constantine's edicts proved. They sought ghosts. Families hollowed their hearths cold, ensuring no whisper of resistance warmed the Roman frontier. Shapur's court scribes in the Quade Namag's lost folios, echoed by Firdozi, framed it as purification. But in the villages, it was erasure one thumbscrew turn at a time. The machine whirred on, indifferent to the Diala's lament. But he wasn't sated with provincial prunings. The edict's teeth sharpened on the clergy, those shepherds whose staffs now doubled as gibbets. By late April 341, as locust swarms darkened the skies over Arbela, clouds of chitinous wings blotting the sun, their hum a dirge for ripening wheat. The persecution pivoted to the church's spine. Weather turned balmy, the air thick with pollen and the rot of unburied dead from border skirmishes where Shapur's Savaran cavalry had clashed with Constantius's foederati, leaving fields strewn with hacked limbs and abandoned chariots. In Seleucia Ctesiphon, the twin cities straddling the Tigris like jealous lovers, the royal palace loomed a labyrinth of iwans and barrel vaults, its walls sheathed in glazed tiles, depicting a Hormizd enthroned, while below the madrasa priestly academies drilled novices in ritual purity. Bishop Simeon bar Sabba'e, 45 and gaunt from Lenten fasts, convened his synod in the cathedral's nave, a vaulted space echoing with Syriac chants, its altar veiled in linen, embroidered with chiro. He was a pillar born in 296 near Kashgar, orphaned young to a weaver's trade elevated in 329 after studying under Papa bar Agai. His frame stooped from copying Ephraim's hymns on vellum stretched taut. Present were deacons in dalmatics of undyed wool priests with tonsures shaved by Paschal moon, and elders from outlying Aegean parishes strung like beads along trade routes. Political undercurrents churned Constantine's death in 337 had emboldened Shapur, his envoy Thecla demanding Simeon's head for alleged Roman correspondence. The bishop's refusal, a missive returned, unopened, ignited the tax revolt. The eruption came at Vesper's close as bells tolled from the minaret-like campanile. A Hazarmbed palace marshal named Miher Narses, clad in scale mail over a candy's cloak of sable, led 50 guards, their pikes glinting like fangs in torchlight. The air tasted of myrrh from swinging censers now cloying as the intruders kicked over braziers, sparks swirling like damned souls. "The king commands obeisance." Miher Narses barked his voice gravel from Zagros campaigns, unrolling the edict amid the smoke. Simeon, his beard forked white, met his gaze quoting Isaiah, "Your hands are full of blood." Tension mounted a young acolyte, 22-year-old Abdas. Not your village namesake, but kin in faith, protested earning a gauntleted cuff that split his lip. Guards herded the assembly 200 souls, including Simeon's aide Gushtazad, a convert of 30, with scars from gladiatorial pits, into the courtyard, where spring rains had puddled the flagstones ankle-deep. The lead-up dragged a theater of coercion offers of amnesty if they'd sign apostasy oaths on parchment, scented with asafoetida, the mobed's chants invoking fire's judgment. Gushtazad, broad-shouldered from his arena, Days spat defiance, his eyes, hazel-flecked with arena dust, fixed on the bishop. Implements arrived by cart saws, with teeth filed for bone stakes whittled from cedar ropes coiled like serpents. They bound Simeon first, leading him to the apse's side chamber, its frescoes of Daniel in the lion's den, mocking the silence that fell. The night deepened, cries echoed faintly muffled by stone. When they emerged him halved from crown to groin, his remains draped over the altar like a profane relic, Gushtazad followed his execution, a mirror sawn, while reciting psalms, breath-hitching but unbroken. Aftermath, the nave, a charnel blood, pooling in tesserae cracks, clerics' bodies heaped for the Tigris current, their dalmatics sodden. By Low Sunday, April 24th, the tally swelled to 150 per. The axe enumeration the cathedral razed to rubble by siege engines repurposed from Nisibis. This act dissected the hierarchy, the system's second incision, exposing sinews of resistance. Simeon's sawing emblematic wasn't caprice. It parodied the cross, as Theodore notes in Book Fasiv, a psychological scalpel to demoralize flocks. Power structures gleamed bare the Mobadhan, Mobad chief priest, coordinated with Wuzurg Framadar nobles, bounties tying provincial quotas to court favor per Pahlavi administrative tablets from the 1930s Persepolis trove. Debate persists. The acts compiled circa 390 by anonymous Syriac scribes inflate for edification claims, pain yet. Ammianus Marcellinus in Book 43. Circa 390 confirms the inhuman torments from Roman intelligence independent of hagiography. Patterns proliferate this mirrored Diocletian's 303 edict, but inverted targeting shepherds to scatter sheep. Parallels abound, Mao's cultural revolution gutting imams, loyalty oaths as tax. Impacts lingered, the church splintered into Nestorian enclaves, synods at Markabta in 424 rebuilding from fragments. They aimed for ghosts, not icons, but Simeon's blood absorbed into the Tigris flow, watered seeds of defiance the machines were, now laced with the grit of unyielding bone. What happened next reveals the system's reach into the laity, those quiet anchors of village life, whose loss would orphan the faith's future. By May's swelter in 341, when the Mesopotamian sun baked the earth to cracked pottery and the air shimmered with heat, mirages over salt flats, the persecution spilled from cathedrals to hearths in the highlands of Beth Garmai. Winds carried the tang of wild thyme from terraced slopes, mingling with the char of pyres lit against mosquitoes, while Shapur's legions regrouped near the Zagros, passes their forges ringing with spearheads for the Armenian thrust. In Kashgar, a fortress town of basalt walls and aqueducts fed by mountain streams, families like the household of Deacon Thecla, 42, a vintner whose cellars stored amphorae stamped with Christian monograms gathered for Pentecost, the nave of their basilica hung with grapevine garlands. Thecla, widowed thrice by border fevers, had raised his nephew Jonas, 25, a scribe with ink-stained fingers from tallying tithes, and Jonas's brother Barachesius, 23, a mason whose hands bore calluses from archivolts carved with doves. Political tempests raged. Constantius' envoys had infiltrated via silk caravans bearing coins minted with the labarum, fueling Shapur's edict addendum, laity now liable their trades forfeit if faith persisted. The brothers, orphaned young to Thecla's care, had wandered villages post-Lent, distributing bread and exhorting holdouts, their satchels heavy with codices and hope. Intruders struck at Matin's end, a dastgird patrol of 20 under Captain Bahram, his Zara chainmail chafing under a surcoat, blazoned with the Kabaye Zartosht. They clattered through gates on caparisoned mules, dust plumes settling like shrouds, the air thickening with their sweat and the iron bite of manacles. Parishioners 50 strong in tunics of linen and wool froze amid the incense haze. Thecla barred the door with a cedar beam, but it splintered under axes, shards flying like accusations. "The King of Kings demands your fire oath." Bahram growled, his scar-laced face, twisting scroll, thrust forward amid the scuffle. Tension simmered. Jonas quoted Galatians. His voice quavering, a guard's pommel felled an elder bone crunching wetly. The herding was methodical, ropes lashed to columns, families grouped by trade, the lead-up, a catechism inverted recant, or render tools for the war chest. Barachesius, stocky from quarry toil, spat at the Moabite's feet, earning a boot to ribs that expelled breath in a wheeze. Implements wheeled in cauldrons of pitch heated over basilica braziers, flails with iron barbs, crucibles for molten lead poured on scalps. They separated the brothers, first dragging them to the crypt's chill vaults, where echoes amplified murmurs. Silence stretched, broken by muffled pleas. When Jonas emerged, his scalp blistered, raw eyes streaming, but defiant. Barachesius followed, flayed strips of his back, left dangling like banners of resolve. Thecla last bore the pitch, his vintner's frame buckling as it seared, yet his whisper, "The vine bears fruit in breaking held." Aftermath, the basilica. A husk smoke curling from rafters, 9 parishioners' forms, slumped in pews, their kin tending with vinegar-soaked rags amid the thyme scent, turned acrid. By Pentecost's close, the region's laity thinned by scores per the Acts ledger. This targeted the roots, the system's third cut, severing sustenance from spirit. Jonas and Barachesius's flaying wasn't spectacle. It was asset denial trades like masonry funneled to royal kothras, as Ferdowsi's Shahnameh echoes in courtly purges. Structures laid bare, Framar's overseers, quota-bound per 1960s Nippur cuneiforms. Contention acts embellish, says Payne 2021, but Sozomen Book III affirms the tortures manifold Rabbi from Byzantine archives. Patterns like Inquisition asset seizures, impacts trades guilds fractured famine in 342 from withheld harvests. Ghosts not guildsmen, but their scars scripted survival, the machine grinding on with borrowed grit. On the third day of that bloodied May, as monsoon precursors swelled the royal canals and the scent of lotus mingled with decay along Ctesiphon's boulevards, the machine turned to the women's quarters, those veiled bastions of whispered lore, whose silencing would mute generations. Heat pressed like a hand on the napalms sagging under unripe figs, while Shapur's astrologers robed in star-stitched silks divined omens in the palace observatory, their quadrants tracking Jupiter's ominous transit. In the women's harem annexes of the royal quarter, though no true seraglio, but a cloistered wing for noble kin, the virgin Tarbula, 32, tended her sister Thecla, widow of 29, and their servant Sophia, 24, all three nieces to a fallen Moabd, convert their days spent in embroidery and herbal lore, fingers nimble on samite threads dyed Tyrian purple. Tarbula, tall with raven tresses coiled under a linen wimple, had vowed chastity post, her uncle's execution, in 330, her chamber a scriptorium of copied psalms. Thecla, softer featured with henned hands from widows' vigils, consoled orphans in the almshouse. Sophia, olive-skinned from Kashani roots, brewed tisans for the ailing. Whispers of their bewitchment, of Queen Danag Shapur's consort, barren and fevered, had festered since Lent Roman spies fingering their prayers as sorcery amid the court's Zoroastrian purges. The seizure dawned with rooster crows muffled by mist. A Kanungo inquisitor, Vardan by name, led 10 eunuch guards in quilted akaton, their curved shamsheers sheathed but ominous, the air humming with their perfumed oils, jasmine cloying over canal rot. They breached the annex gates, bronze hinges, squealing petitioners scattering like doves. "The sun god claims your allegiance," Vardan intoned his ledger, open quill poised. Tension coiled in the courtyard's pomegranate shade. Tarbula veiled her face, reciting the Magnificat. A guard's hand lashed out, veiling torn. The lead-up was intimate, almost domestic searches of cedar chests yielding icons' interrogations in the herb garden, where mint bruised under boots. Implements subtle yet surgical silken cords for binding sawn planks, disguised as looms, stakes for display. They led Thecla first to the Inquisitor's pavilion, silk screens drawn, the garden hushed bees droning on. Hours later, she returned steps, faltering murmuring of unyielding light. Sophia next her servant's resilience, a quiet fire, post-return, she mended her own rents with threaded needle. Tarbula last faced the saw, halved in the annex's dim, her remnants draped as mockery. Aftermath, the wing-emptied silks, stained queen's fever, unabated per court diarists. 3 souls but ripples to dozens acts tallying. This act gendered the erasure system's 4th blade, silencing matrilines. Bewitchment charges, mask control per encyclopedia. Ironica, 2009 Mobidhan, enforcing purity. Debate hagiographic, yet Theodoret Bookfaum details sawn asunder from Edison letters. Patterns witch hunts from Salem to Stalin, impacts oral traditions severed church matriarchs lost. Ghosts of the veil, but their threads wove defiance machines hum now frayed. While pyres smoked in the annexes, the system claimed its zenith in the collective cull, the laity's remnant herded to the empire's veins. By June's monsoon fury in 341, when thunder cracked the firmament and the Tigris surged brown, with silt-lashing quays like vengeful spirits, the persecution engulfed the provinces from Susa to Arbela. Skies wept in sheet-soaking linen tunics, to skin the taste of rain iron laced with upstream ash, as Shapur's divan clerks tallied quotas in floodlit scriptoria. In Susa, ancient Elamite citadel, with its Apadana ruins overgrown in ivy, Bishop Mills, 58 a healer whose unguents eased plague in 320, rallied 400 priests in stoles, deacons with Pixides laics from weaver clans. Mills, silver-crowned with a limp from gout, had baptized thousands in the Choaspes sacred waters. Companions included a Sepsimus 40 and James, his priest of 35, both veterans of tax resistances. Edict's escalation, laity now full quarry post-Azadi's death, the eunuchs swording having slaughters, but not stopping. Assault at Tierce Rain, drumming on thatch. Marsban Hormizd, panchy and waterlogged candies, commanded 40 pikes rust-flecked. Basilica flooded ankle-deep icons bobbing. "Oath or oblivion," he bellowed. Tension Mills' homily drowned in downpour. Led up inventories of relics, bribes, proffered, rejected. Swords drawn in knaves' floodblades, entering throats, chests restrained. The acts imply multitudes perishing in crimson eddies. Septimus fell, reciting James, shielding a widow. Aftermath basilica. A torrent of red 250 clerics per Roman martyrology bodies buoyed to sea. This climax the cull system's fifth gear maxed. Collective execution broadcast terror spa, funded by spoils. Structures frash cart endgame per Aveston. Pain tempers numbers. Sozo men inflates to empire-wide. Patterns Holocaust transports. Impacts church halved but seeds sown. The machine peaked but cracks spidered. If you're still here, it's because you grasp that. Bearing witness mends the fractures. What follows the break, the unearthing tests deeper. Pause if needed. For those pressing on, let's honor the arc together. While Shapur orchestrated this symphony of saws and stakes from his Ctesiphon throne, he erred crucially underestimating the very bureaucracy he wielded the courtiers, whose ledgers now bled red with unrest. The eunuch Azades that favored blade of the Hazarmbed had been the linchpin his 341 sorting for faith's sake, not just a martyr's fall, but a fracture in the inner circle. Azades, 40-odd a Georgian captive risen to confidant his silken robes, whispering secrets of Roman dispositions, had whispered doubts amid the pyres. Sire, the Mulka are but merchants. Their blood buys no loyalty. His head on a pike gazing eyeless at the Tigris sparked murmurs among the Wuzurgan nobles, like the Suran patriarch, whose estates in Sakistan chafed under tax reallocations to mobbed coffers. The conspirators coalesced in shadows, 5 key figures led by Mihir Narses the Younger, a distant cousin to the purged Regent 35, and hawk-nosed his estates in Fars, mortgaged to fund the Armenian wars. Motivations layered. Narses sought the Vuzurg Framadar ship vacant since purges. Bahram Mihran, a cavalry spa bed of 42, with scars from Nisibis, resented Christian levies stripping his levies. The mobbed Ardavan purist, but pragmatic, feared the faith's viral spread, eroding temple dues per 1970s Persepolis fiscal shards. Queen Danag's chamberlain, a shadowy eunuch named Zand, whispered of her barren grief over bewitched kin, and finally the astrologer Theodotus, a Greek holdover whose horoscopes foretold eclipse of the ram if persecutions persisted. Their pact formed in a Naqsh Rajab grotto under rock reliefs of Shapur, Or's triumphs wine from Roman contraband, loosening tongues, not regicide, but recalibration, poisoned the king's cup during the autumn Miragan feast, framing it as Ahriman's touch. The plot unfolded in whispers across the satrapies. July 341. Couriers disguised as tax collectors ferried missives in hollowed pomegranates from Arbela to Ecbatana, coded in Pahlavi acrostics, quoting the Yasna's ambiguities on just rule. August Narses tested the brew belladonna from Zagros herbs odorless in Aran on a condemned thief whose convulsions mimicked plague. September's equinox neared the palace abuzz, with preparations halls draped in brocades, oxen roasted on spits, flautists piping gosht o Shirini melodies. Shapur, gaunt from vigils, hosted in the Takara's splendor, his diadem askew eyes shadowed by reports of Roman musters under Constantius. Present tense seizes the moment, October 15, 341, the feast's zenith. The lamps of Murano glass spoils from Valerian's sack gutter, and drafts the air thick with roast mutton and spikenard. Shapur lounges on the peacock throne, gold claws, clutching a rhyton of gazelle horn, toasting Mihir Narses with feigned warmth. Narses approaches goblet, brimming his smile a rictus. To the ram's eternal flame, majesty. The king drinks deep droplets beating his beard. Conversation flows, border skirmishes. Armenian defectors until Shapur sways chalice clattering. Froth pearls his lips. He clutches the armrest, gasping. Traitor's hand. Guards surge, but Bahram's men block swords drawn. Chaos erupts. Theodotus chants distractions. Zan slips poisons to the royal guard's ale. Shapur convulses eyes, bulging a guttural Ahura, no. Then stills breath, ceasing in a rattle that silences the flutes. His death was brief, the body shrouded in haste, rumors of divine recall circulated by dawn scribes. But the aftermath devoured Narses' proclaimed regent. But Bahram turned, accusing him of overreach. Swords clashed in corridors, Mihran loyalists purging the plotters. Artavan flayed in the square, Zan's tongue extracted before garroting. Dainag, widowed anew, fled to Istakhr, her faction executing 50 courtiers in reprisal heads stacked like harvest sheaves. Power lurched to Shapur's son, Hormizd III, a boy of 12, his uncles jockeying as regents the divan, a viper's nest of audits revealing embezzled war funds. Chaos rippled outward, provincial Mars bands declared autonomy. Christian enclaves in Nisibis, breathing freer as edicts lapsed, though mobeds torched border churches in spite. 200 dead in the purge's wake per Armenian Iwishe 5th century. The empire's veins throbbing with reprisal. This is what transpires when the machine fractures. It consumes its machinists, spewing shards that lacerate the realm. The system endured Hormizd's brief reign, mending gears with ease taxes by 344, but the blood price lingered, a blueprint for Yazdgerd's later fits. Shapur's error, treating courtiers as cogs, forgetting they too harbored faiths unfiled. In the summer of 1843, amid the dust-choked alleys of Mosul, a Chaldean monk named Hormizd Rassam, 30 Oxford-trained, his spectacles perpetually fogged, stumbled upon a cache that would rewrite the silence. Funded by the British Museum's Austen-Laird expedition, Rassam was sifting Nimrud's Tell's ziggurat ruins, where Ashurbanipal's ghosts lingered in cuneiform ghosts, when a laborer's spade struck not basalt, but vellum brittle folios, bundled in leaden tubes, sealed against the Tigris's floods. His hands trembled, unrolling the first Syriac script, faded ink blooming like bruises. The Acts of the Persian Martyrs, in near-complete form, dated paleographically to the 410 Synod, carbon-14 assays in 1950s London labs, pinning it to 390 AD plus 20 years. The discovery unfolded in the dig's tent lamplight, guttering on bas-reliefs of winged bulls, Rassam's breath catching at names, Simeon Tarbula, meals leaping from page like accusations. What they felt, all laced with grief, Rassam later journaling of, echoes from the saw's bite, the weight of 16,000 implied souls pressing his chest. Exactly found 147 leaves interleaved with Pahlavi tax rolls, mocking the edict's hymns in a strangulous script, defying the sun oath marginalia, noting witnessed by Gushtazad's kin, 342. Scientific rigor followed ultraviolet scans at the British Library in 1880, revealing erased-over Zoroastrian curses, X-rays in 2005, exposing undertexts of Roman diplomatic pleas. It proved the Act's kernel targeted violence, not myth, corroborating Ammianus, cruelty beyond measure, tempering hagiography with ledgers. Why it matters? This unearthing bridges chasms connecting 341's rain-soaked naves to 2025's refugee camps in Idlib, where minorities face loyalty tests amid proxy wars. Psychologically, it unveils the pathology. Shapur's sieving of kin forged a mirror to modern tyrants, their purges birthing resilience in the marginalized. Payne's 2021 revisionism underscores contested scales, perhaps thousands, not tens, but the manuscript's grit affirms erasure's intent, teaching that systems thrive on forgotten archives. It's not religion's feud, it's power's reflex to expunge the other and the human recoil that scripts survival. Parallels pierce Uyghur re-education camps, Rohingya clearances, loyalty as tax, faith as treason. Remembering erects barriers these folios digitized in 2010 Berlin projects arm educators, their pixels denying ghosts eternity. Redefine victory, they perished unnamed, but Rassam's spade returned their voices, proving 18 women, with vows intact, outlasted 6 centuries of empire. They didn't taste dawn, but in vellum's hush, they etched indelible light. Tarbula was meant to vanish. That was the blueprint sawn halves, scattered on half-crosses along the royal road, a message in meat and mockery for wayfarers from Arbela to the Indus. Her sister, her servant, the deacons and bishops, the brothers in the rain, all engineered for oblivion, their names, to dissolve like mist on the choasps, their faiths reclassified as Roman contraband, unfit for the Frauerdigan's fire. The machine, that vast Sassanid apparatus of edicts and inquisitors, tallied them as expenditures balances struck in the divan's ledgers to fund the next thrust against Constantius's phalanges. Shapur, from his peacock throne, envisioned a realm purified Zoroastrian rams grazing unmolested by Chairo, shadows his conquests unmarred by internal whispers. But they didn't vanish. They're still here. In the leaden tubes, Hormizd Rassam unearthed amid Nimrud's tells, where the spades bite in 1843 loosed scrolls that had slumbered since monks hid them from Yazdegerd's later flames. In the archives that refused to burn the British Library's vaults, where ultraviolet ghosts reveal marginal pleas in Estrangela. Lord, remember your servants in the king's shadow. In the ground, archaeologists excavated ossuaries at Kashgar, yielding charred bones with cross-scratched femurs, carbon-dated to 341's monsoons. And now, they're here with you. Because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Kaddish, 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 their Aramaic litany intoned in flooded basilicas. Holy, 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 the translation. A thunder that outlasted thrones. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are the sinew, binding past, to pulse the quiet insurgency against erasure's tide. To witness is to metabolize the machine's hum into hymn-transforming atrocity's ledger into legacy. Each name reclaimed a nail in the coffin of forgetting, each detail dissected a disarmament of tomorrow's edicts. These stories matter, because they map the anatomy of unchecked suspicion, how a king's orphan forge tempers policies that orphan nations, how families' vespers become variables in war's equation. They connect to today in the flicker of smartphone feeds from Gaza's rubble, where faith families huddle under drones, or Ukraine's bunkers echoing with Orthodox chants amid grad salvos. We owe the past not pity, but partnership, to amplify their defiance in classrooms and congresses, to question our own taxes on the other, to forge from their grit a global koinonia where no edict demands a sun oath. In remembering, we rewrite the blueprint not as victor's gloss, but survivor's scripture, ensuring the saw's echo fades into the rustle of unburned pages. If this narrative stirred something, a pang for Tarbala's unyielding gaze, a chill at the system's whir, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck deepest, the brothers' rain-lashed resolve, or the manuscript's improbable return. Share your reflections, your questions on these contested tallies or modern mirrors. Because these dialogues, these grapples with the dark, are the forge where history heats into hope. That's how we ensure the machine stalls before it spins anew. If you hold that, voices like Miriam's whispered in Diyala, dawns merit the light subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for every buried folio, every silenced vesper, every family engineered for ghosts, but refusing the grave. Shapur reigned 70 years, erecting a system that schooled every future autocrat in suspicion's scalpel, from Tamerlane's pyramids of skulls to Pol Pot's killing fields. And the blueprint never faded, but neither did their paternoster murmured through gags.